She promised to change medicine forever. One drop of blood, hundreds of tests. Presidents trusted her. Billionaires invested in her. Doctors believed her. But the machines never worked. Patients were misdiagnosed. Employees were silenced. This is not a story of failure. This is the true crime story of Elizabeth Holmes and the $9 billion lie that fooled the world. Elizabeth Holmes was once celebrated as a revolutionary visionary, a woman who promised to change the future of medicine. With her signature black turtleneck, deep voice, and intense confidence, she was often compared to Steve Jobs, but behind the image of brilliance was one of the biggest frauds in modern medical history. Elizabeth Holmes was born in 1984 in Washington, D.C., into a well-connected family with strong ties to government and business. From a young age, she was extremely ambitious. She believed she was destined to change the world, and failure was never part of her plan. In 2002, Holmes enrolled at Stanford University, studying chemical engineering. During her time there, she became obsessed with a bold idea, a medical device that could run hundreds of blood tests, using just a few drops of blood from a finger prick. No painful needles, no expensive labs, fast, cheap, and accessible healthcare for everyone. At just 19 years old, Holmes dropped out of Stanford to pursue this idea full-time. In 2003, she founded a startup called Theranos, a name derived from the words therapy and diagnosis. She claimed her company would completely disrupt the healthcare industry. Holmes had one extraordinary skill: persuasion. She spoke with absolute confidence, even when her ideas were unproven. Wealthy investors were captivated by her vision. Millions of dollars poured in, followed by hundreds of millions more. Soon, Theranos attracted powerful and famous names to its board of directors, including former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, former Defense Secretary James Mattis, former Secretary of State George Shultz. However, there was a critical problem. Almost none of these board members had any background in medical science or laboratory technology. Holmes preferred it that way. Real scientists might ask difficult questions she didn't want to answer. Theranos claimed its proprietary machine, called Edison, could perform over 200 blood tests using a single drop of blood. But inside the company, employees saw a very different reality. The machines frequently failed. Test results were inaccurate, inconsistent, and sometimes dangerously wrong. Instead of fixing the technology, Holmes focused on secrecy and control. Employees were divided into isolated teams. Questioning the technology was treated as disloyalty. Those who raised concerns were threatened with lawsuits, fired, or silenced through intimidation. A culture of fear spread throughout Theranos. Workers knew something was terribly wrong, but speaking up could destroy their careers. Despite these internal failures, the public image of Theranos continued to grow. The company's valuation soared to $9 billion, and Elizabeth Holmes was declared the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. But the success was built on a lie. The technology did not work as promised. Patients' health was at risk, and the foundation of Theranos was nothing more than deception. That lie would eventually collapse, and when it did, it would expose Elizabeth Holmes to the world. Behind the glossy media interviews and billion-dollar valuation, the reality inside Theranos was dark, chaotic, and dangerous. While Elizabeth Holmes continued to promise a medical revolution to the world, employees inside the company were witnessing something very different. The technology simply did not work. Theranos' flagship invention, the Edison machine, was supposed to perform over 200 blood tests using just a few drops of blood. In reality, it struggled to perform even a handful of basic tests accurately. The machines frequently broke down, produced wildly inconsistent results, or failed entirely. Instead of admitting these failures, Holmes and her leadership team chose a different path: deception. Inside Theranos, secrecy was extreme. Employees were separated into isolated teams and forbidden from sharing information with one another. Even scientists working on related projects were kept in the dark. This wasn't to protect innovation. It was to prevent anyone from seeing the full picture of failure. Many employees were young, idealistic scientists who had joined Theranos believing they were saving lives. What they found instead was alarming. Blood samples, collected from patients, were often diluted to make them work with the Edison machine. This dilution caused inaccurate results, sometimes dangerously inaccurate. To hide the problem, Theranos secretly used traditional commercial lab machines made by other companies, like Siemens. These machines required much larger blood samples, directly contradicting Theranos' core promise. Even worse, Patients were told their tests were run on Theranos technology when they were not. Some test results falsely indicated serious conditions, including abnormal potassium levels that could suggest heart failure. Doctors and patients trusted these results, unaware that they were based on faulty or manipulated data. Employees who raised concerns were quickly silenced. One former employee, Ian Gibbons, a respected biochemist, warned leadership that the technology was unreliable. Instead of listening, Theranos' legal team pressured him. He later died by suicide in 2013, a tragic event that highlighted the intense pressure inside the company. Others tried to speak up. Tyler Schultz, the grandson of board member George Schultz, discovered serious problems in the lab data. When he attempted to alert leadership, he was met with intimidation, surveillance, and legal threats, even from his own family connections. Theranos had a powerful weapon, lawyers. The company aggressively used non-disclosure agreements and lawsuits to frighten employees into silence. Speaking out could mean financial ruin. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Holmes continued to charm investors, politicians, and the media. Theranos partnered with Walgreens, placing Theranos blood testing centers inside retail pharmacies across the United States. Thousands of real patients now depended on the company's tests. Internally, panic was growing. Engineers and lab workers knew the truth. The technology was not ready, and patients were at risk. But the pressure to meet Holmes's promises was overwhelming. By this point, Theranos was no longer just exaggerating. It was actively deceiving. Data was manipulated, reports were selectively presented, and failures were hidden from regulators. The company's survival depended on one thing: keeping the lie alive. But lies rarely remain hidden forever. For years, Elizabeth Holmes managed to keep the illusion of Theranos alive through secrecy, intimidation, and powerful connections. But inside the company, fear was slowly turning into determination. A few brave individuals decided that staying silent was no longer an option. Lives were at stake. One of the most important whistleblowers was Tyler Schultz, a young scientist and the grandson of Theranos board member George Schultz. Tyler joined Theranos believing deeply in its mission. However, as he worked with real lab data, he noticed serious inconsistencies. Test results did not match expected scientific outcomes. Error rates were dangerously high. Tyler reported his concerns internally, expecting leadership to investigate. Instead, he was ignored and then targeted. Theranos executives accused him of misunderstanding the data. Soon after, he was pushed out of the company. But Tyler didn't stop. He gathered documents and evidence, convinced that the public needed to know the truth. At the same time, another former employee, Erica Chung, was facing similar concerns. As a lab associate, she directly handled patient samples. She saw firsthand how Theranos diluted blood samples and secretly relied on traditional machines while claiming the Edison device was responsible for the results. She feared patients could be seriously harmed. Both Tyler and Erica attempted to alert regulators, including the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. But their warnings initially went nowhere. The breakthrough came in 2015, when John Carreyrou, an investigative reporter for the Wall Street Journal, received a tip about Theranos. At first, Holmes tried to stop the investigation. She hired powerful lawyers and pressured the newspaper not to publish. She also launched a public relations counterattack, giving interviews, denying all allegations and claiming Theranos was being misunderstood. But Carreyrou kept digging. He spoke with former employees, doctors, and patients. Slowly, a clear picture emerged. Theranos' technology did not work, and the company had been lying for years. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published its first explosive article. It revealed that Theranos' blood tests were unreliable and that the company used standard lab machines while misleading patients and investors. The impact was immediate. Partnerships began to collapse. Walgreens started distancing itself. Regulators launched investigations. The media, once Holmes's biggest supporter, now turned against her. Elizabeth Holmes responded by doubling down on denial. She appeared on television, insisting that Theranos' technology was sound and that the company was a victim of unfair attacks. Her calm confidence remained, but cracks were showing. Behind the scenes, the pressure was immense. Government agencies demanded data. Inspectors uncovered widespread lab failures. The myth of Theranos was unraveling faster than Holmes could control. For the whistleblowers, the cost was enormous. Tyler Schultz faced years of legal threats and personal stress. Erica Chung risked her career, but their courage changed everything. The truth was finally out and there was no turning back. After the Wall Street Journal exposed the truth in 2015, the empire Elizabeth Holmes built on promises and deception began to crumble rapidly. What once seemed like a revolutionary medical company was now under intense scrutiny from regulators, investors, and the public. Government agencies moved quickly. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, conducted inspections of Theranos' laboratories. Their findings were devastating. Inspectors discovered serious violations, including unreliable testing procedures, poor quality control, and unqualified personnel handling patient samples. In 2016, CMS issued a harsh ruling. Theranos was banned from operating blood testing labs for 2 years, and Elizabeth Holmes herself was prohibited from owning or operating a medical laboratory during that period. This decision effectively destroyed the core of Theranos' business. At the same time, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, began investigating Theranos' devices. The company was forced to stop using its Edison machines for most tests. What remained of Theranos' technology was exposed as incomplete and unsafe. Business partnerships collapsed one by one. Walgreens, which had placed Theranos testing centers in hundreds of its stores, terminated the partnership. Other deals quietly disappeared. Investors who once praised Holmes now demanded answers. Financially, Theranos was imploding. Lawsuits poured in from investors and patients. The company, once valued at $9 billion, was now nearly worthless. In 2018, the legal consequences became unavoidable. The U.S. Department of Justice charged Elizabeth Holmes and former Theranos president Ramesh Sunny Balwani with multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. Prosecutors alleged that Holmes knowingly misled investors, doctors, and patients about the company's technology. Holmes pleaded not guilty. She claimed she had trusted her engineers and blamed Balwani, both professionally and personally. She portrayed herself as a young entrepreneur who had been manipulated, but evidence told a different story. Emails, text messages, and internal documents showed Holmes was deeply involved in decision-making. She approved misleading demonstrations, false reports, and exaggerated claims about Theranos' capabilities. Former employees testified that she ignored warnings and punished those who questioned her. As the case moved forward, Theranos officially shut down in September 2018. Employees were laid off. Assets were liquidated. The company that once promised to save lives was gone. Public perception of Elizabeth Holmes shifted dramatically. Media coverage now focused on deception, ego, and unchecked ambition. The black turtleneck that once symbolized innovation became a symbol of fraud. The trial attracted massive attention. It raised serious questions about Silicon Valley culture, where hype often outweighs truth, and visionaries are rarely questioned. Elizabeth Holmes was no longer a celebrated billionaire. She was now a defendant in a federal criminal case. The trial of Elizabeth Holmes was one of the most closely watched corporate crime cases in modern U.S. history. Once celebrated as a tech visionary, Holmes now faced the possibility of spending years in prison. The courtroom became the final stage where truth, ambition, and deception collided. The trial began in 2021 in federal court in California. Prosecutors argued that Holmes knowingly lied about Theranos' technology to investors, doctors, and patients. They presented emails, investor pitch decks, internal reports, and testimony from former employees who described a company built on fear, secrecy, and lies. The prosecution emphasized one key point. This was not a case of failure. It was a case of fraud. Holmes did not simply believe in a technology that failed. She continued to promote it long after she knew it did not work. Holmes's defense team painted a very different picture. They portrayed her as a young, inexperienced entrepreneur who trusted the wrong people. Much of the blame was placed on Ramesh Sunny Balwani, Theranos' former president and Holmes's romantic partner. Holmes also claimed she was emotionally manipulated and abused, affecting her judgment. When Elizabeth Holmes took the stand, it was a rare moment. She admitted mistakes but denied intentional wrongdoing. She insisted she believed in Theranos' mission and never meant to deceive anyone. The jury was not convinced. In January 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy related to defrauding investors. She was acquitted on some charges involving patients, but the verdict made one thing clear. The court held her personally responsible. In November 2022, Holmes was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison, along with millions of dollars in restitution to investors. Her sentence marked a dramatic fall from billionaire CEO to convicted felon. Her former partner, Sunny Balwani, was also convicted and sentenced to nearly 13 years in prison. The Theranos scandal left a lasting impact. It exposed the dangers of unchecked hype in Silicon Valley and showed how charisma can sometimes overpower evidence. Investors admitted they failed to ask hard questions. Regulators strengthened oversight, and whistleblowers were finally recognized as heroes. Perhaps most importantly, the case highlighted the real victims, patients who received inaccurate medical results and made health decisions based on false information. Elizabeth Holmes' story is no longer about innovation. It is a cautionary tale about ambition without accountability, confidence without truth, and the devastating cost of deception. The promise to change the world ended in one of the greatest frauds of the 21st century.